Hey everyone, welcome to a new section of the course. We are now going to start talking about a little more advanced topics. But don't worry, it's not going to be too complicated because as always, we are going to see things step by step. So let's get started with callback functions. Callback functions are passed as arguments of other functions, and they are normally executed at the end of the parent function. So we know that JavaScript is an asynchronous language, and there are times when this can be a bit problematic. So let's see a very basic example to get started. So I'm going to create a function called getUser. And inside here, I'm going to simulate as if I was getting this information from an external source. I'm not doing this right now, but let's simulate it. So let's create a variable called u. And let's say I got this from a database or an API or something like this. And I'm getting in return an object. And one of the properties of this object is going to be the name property. And then we have the name of the user. So what we are going to do now is just returning this user. So this is just a simulation. So let's say we got this information from an external source and now we are just returning it. So now that we have this, or we will have this when we execute this function, let's try to do something with this name. So I'm going to create another function called greetUser. And this function is going to receive an user as an argument. And what this is going to do is just sending a message to this user, but this is going to be a personalized message with the user name. So let's say the message is hi, then we concatenate with the name of the user, so user.name, and then we concatenate with a colon, and then the rest of the message, something like how are you? All right, so pretty basic stuff, just so we can use as an example. Now let's begin to write our code. So I'm going to create a variable called user. And I'm going to call this function. So again, this is a simulation. So let's say I'm retrieving this information from an external source. This function is going to return this user. And now we have it inside our user variable. So now we are ready to call the greetUser function using that user as an argument. All right, so doing this, let's go back to our page. Let's refresh it. And as you can see, we successfully got the user, which is an object that has a property called name. And now we are using this object as an argument of another function, and we were able to form this message. So far, so good. But the only reason why we didn't have any problem here is because this function was executed so fast that when we ran this greetUser function, when we invoked it, we already had the user inside this variable. But in a real life situation, if we were really getting it from an external source, this wouldn't be that fast. We would have a delay. So let's simulate a 1 second delay. So here, instead of returning it right away, let's simulate a 1 second delay here with a set timeout. So the time is going to be 1000 milliseconds, and At the end of this time, then we are going to return that information. So this function is going to take 1 second to return the username. So let's see what happens now when we try to get it and then right away call the greet user function. I'm going to save this. Now refreshing the page. So as you can see, now we have an error. It's saying cannot read property name of undefined. So what's going on here? When we call this function, this is not immediate. This is taking 1 second. But as JavaScript is an asynchronous language, it doesn't wait until this function finishes to go to the next line. It just starts executing this one and then just jumps directly to the next line. And this is a problem because when we try to use this variable as an argument for this function, we don't have anything inside it yet because this operation is taking 1 second. So this is what would happen in a real-life situation if we were getting this information from an external source. So what can we do about it? Well, instead of returning this user, we can do something here. Let's pass an argument to this function, which we're going to name callback. You don't have to name it this way. You can name it any way we want. But just to make clear that this is a callback function, I'm going to call it a callback. And what I'm going to do with this, instead of returning the user here, I'm just going to call this function. And I'm going to pass the user as an argument. So every time I invoke this function, it's going to do everything that it's doing, and then at the end, it is going to execute this function with the username as an argument. So this means that it's going to wait until this time passes before executing it. Alright, so now I'm just going to erase this line here. And now I'm not going to create any variable. I'm just going to call this function getUser. So when I call it, as you can see, there's an argument now. So what is this argument? Is a function that's going to be executed here. But which function is this? It can be any function we want. All we have to do is tell the name of the function we want to execute. So when I invoke it, I'm going to pass this greet user as an argument. So what it's going to do is getting inside here, and when it reaches this point, it's just going to do this, which is exactly what we want. And we could use this function with any other callback we want, as I'm going to show in an example in a moment. But before we go ahead, let's save this and let's see what happens. So refreshing the page, there's a 1 second delay, and now we have it being executed without any problem. So now let's create another function just so we can see how useful this callback function can be. So I'm going to create another one that's going to be called goodbye user. So now this is pretty similar, but now I have a bye-bye message. And how do we use this one? Well, we just call the get user again, but now as our callback function, instead of using the greet user as a callback function, we can use any function we want. Now we're going to use the goodbye user function. So when we hit this point, it's just going to use the name that we are passing as an argument. So this is going to be executed. So let's try it out. With just one get user function, we can pass any other function we want as a callback. And by doing this, we are making sure that this is only going to be executed when we actually have the user. So let's save this and let's see what happens. Refresh the page. First one worked correctly. The second one worked correctly. Now I'm going to show you another cool way of using callback functions. This time we had created previously the two functions that we are using as a callback, but we don't have to do this. We can actually create a function by the time we are calling the parent function. So now let's repeat this and let's see if you are familiar with this structure. So instead of doing this, I'm just going to create a function here with an argument. And now I'm just going to write, hey, user.name. This is another way of using a callback function. So as you can see, when we created the get user, we are just telling it that here we are going to pass a function. We are not defining which function it is yet. We are just saying, okay, we have this argument and this argument is going to be called here as a function. So by the time we are creating this, we don't know which function is going to be. So in the previous two examples, we just called two different functions. And now we're actually creating a new function by the time we call this get user function, which is perfectly acceptable. So let's see if this is going to work. I'm going to save this, refreshing the page. And now, as you can see, this was another way of using it. And if you pay attention to the structure with just used, you will see that most jQuery's methods are actually using callback functions. If you take a look at the click method from jQuery, as you can see, the function we pass inside here is actually a callback function. So probably inside the click method, when it was defined, it is doing something like setting the event for this element, and at the end of everything, it's just going to execute a callback. And what's going to be the callback? Well, we are creating the callback every time we use the click function. So it doesn't matter what function it is, because we can define any function we want every time we call this method. And another example here is the set timeout. Now we can see that the set timeout also has a callback function. So when we use this method, as you can see, the first argument is a callback function and the second argument is a time. So every time we call it, we need to specify a function that's going to be executed at the end. So this is how callback functions work. At first, this might seem a bit complicated, but don't worry, it is only a matter of getting used to it, using it a few times, and you see that's actually pretty simple. In the next few lessons, we're going to have opportunities to work a little bit more with callback functions. I'm also going to include it in the next list of exercises. So by the end of the next section, this is going to be very clear for you. Don't worry. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate of leaving your question in the Q&A section. So that was all for now. I'll see you in the next video.